Hello class, welcome back to Algebra 1B Bootcamp. Now we are writing equations of lines. We previously talked about just graphing lines. Now we're going to actually write our own equations. So there are basically two steps to the process. First, you have to find the slope, and then you have to find the y-intercept. Sometimes you can find the slope by counting using your rise over your run. You can also find the slope by using a formula. If you're given 2 points, you may have seen this formula before. But those are the two common ways of finding slope. If you have a word problem, a lot of times your slope is your rate. You'll see the word per. If it's your y-intercept you're looking for, a lot of times you can find it by looking at the graph. Remember, the y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. You can find it by looking at a picture, or sometimes you have to do some calculations. So every single time you're writing an equation of a line, you're looking for an m and a b. In this one, since we're using a graph and we're thinking about y equals mx plus b, the m is how you get from one point to the other. It's your slope. So in this case, you can always count. It's always y is on top and x is on bottom. So if I start at this point, I'm going down 2, and then I'm going over 1, 2, 3, 3. So my slope would be down 2 and over 3. My b, my y-intercept, well, that's the point right here, the point 0, 2, or I just say 2. The other ways to find equations of lines most of the time involve us doing some kind of algebra or some kind of logical thinking. So for example, this one, we're given 2 points and we have to find the equation of the line. So usually what I like to do is honestly just make a table of values. I have the point 2, 3 and the point 4, 7, and that's your x and that's your y. Now, you can find your slope by doing rise over run. Think about how far apart these y's are. Well, these y's are getting bigger by 4. Think about how far apart these x's are. These x's are getting bigger by 2. So your slope is your rise over your run, or your change in y's over your change in x. So 4 over 2, which is 2. Now the hard part is your y-intercept. Because your y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. If we look at this previous example, it's the point 0 something. So looking at my graph, or looking at my table here, I need the point where x is 0. So I have a 1 and a 0. Sometimes I think it's equally as efficient just to use your slope, which is 2, to figure out what your b is. So in the table, each time I should be getting bigger by 2. So like the next number in line here would be 9 and then 11. So if I'm going this way in the table, I actually have to go backwards. So 3 and 1 are 2 apart. And then go backwards 2 more. 1 minus 2 is -1. So your b is -1. Y equals 2x minus 1. when you're given a slope and a point, you can also make a table. Now I have the point 3, 4. When I'm thinking about my slope, that's my m. I'm given that information. So I'm really just doing the second step, where if I have the point 3, 4, I need to find where x is 0. So x is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I have to work backwards, and I have to think, where is 0? What is the logical number for 0? Well, if I'm thinking about my slope, if I'm going down in the table, every time I'm adding 5, which means if I'm going this way in the table for my slope, I should be taking away 5 to keep my pattern consistent. So 4 minus 5 is negative 1. Negative 1 minus 5 is negative 6. And negative 6 minus 5 is negative 11. So it should be y equals my slope, which is 5, x minus. Sometimes when you're doing this process, you'll have decimals, which is totally fine. You can always add and subtract the decimals with very little trouble. And you may have done this different ways in Algebra 1A. Don't worry about that. If you have questions or you want to know a different way to do it, just ask me when you're working on your stuff. So the other thing you need to be aware of is word problems. So for example, Brett is trying to gain weight for the wrestling team. His current weight is 125 pounds and he gains 2 pounds per week. Find the equation of the line that represents the weight gain. When you're thinking about word problems, you either want to look for points, meaning two numbers that kind of go together, or rates. So a rate usually has the word per in it. Not always, but a lot of the time. So when I see the phrase 2 pounds per week, that's my rate. Every week I'm, in this case, gaining 2 pounds. So my slope is 2. Now I need to look for a point, maybe even a starting point. Well, the only other number I have is 125. That's how much he currently weighs. So if we're making the equation of a line starting today with how much he currently weighs, this would be the point 0, 125, which is your B. So it would be y equals 2x, because 2 is your slope, 2 pounds per week, and we start at 125 pounds. And then I could use this. It could ask me how much does he weigh after 5 weeks, and I would plug in 5, figure out the answer. In 2000, there were only 25 rare sea otters in the wild. In 2005, there were a remarkable 60 sea otters in the wild. Write an equation for the number of sea otters in the wild. So, with this one, you want to look for points. So in this case, I have in the year 2000, there were 25 otters. And then in the year 2005, there were 60 otters. Now, thinking logically for a minute, it doesn't really make sense that we started in 2000 because I'm willing to bet there were at one point more than 25 sea otters in the wild. So I'm going to make my equation based on the year 2000. So this is the first year, and then this would be 5 years later. A lot of times it'll tell you to do this in the directions. And it makes my numbers smaller and easier to work with if I do it that way. So since I have my 2 points in my 0 year, I have 25 otters. And then 5 years later, I have 60. Let's make a table. And I'm going to leave some space. when I'm doing this, I gotta find my m and I gotta find my b. So think about how far apart are 25 and 60. Well, 60 minus 25 is 35. Now think about how far apart 0 and 5 are. That's 5. Remember, slope is rise over run. So you're wise, you're rising 35, and you're running 5. 35 over 5 is 7. So that's your m. And then your b, you want the number where x equals 0. Well, conveniently, you already have that. You established that your b was 25. That's how much you're starting with in the year 2000. So it would be y equals 7x plus 25. And there's your answer. Feel free to rewind the video if you need to. And if you would like to do this a different way than how I showed you using formulas, flag me down while you're working and I'll show you how.